what has been the most enjoyable for you about having the opportunity to tell the stories of whether it's the women's basketball team or other female athletes at the places you've covered? I always jokingly call the Tom Rinaldi pieces. What has
Yeah.
it been like to produce content like that, telling the stories of players who are going to be around for 3 or 4 years, most likely?
I think the most rewarding part of it is that piece, is of getting to know the people. And I know our players, like our women's basketball players, really, really well, um, to the point where they're texting me, asking me questions about random things, and then watching them graduate and move on to bigger and better things. Um, to have the privilege to cover them not only as athletes, but as people is why I love what I do. It's not like Maya Pace, who's a junior guard for us and will definitely be an All-American candidate next year. She's not just a basketball player. That's not Maya Pace. Maya Pace is a darn good basketball player and may have broken our single steals record, but she's also an architecture major, which is insanely hard at USD to do and insanely hard as a student athlete and their schedules to do. She's also heavily involved on campus in the Black Engineer Society and Black Student Union. She's a campus leader and a campus voice and a darn good captain too. So those layers are what I find to be the most privileging to be able to share with people in an authentic way so that fans know it's not just about what's going on the court here. There's other layers. It's not just about what they do now on the court. It's about what they're doing outside of the court too.
Talk about the importance of having women working in sports broadcasting, whether it be in graphic design, similar to what you're doing, or videography as a primary lead play-by-play person, or even if it's something as somewhat traditional during the last couple of decades as being a sideline reporter. What is the importance of having women not only in sports broadcasting, but showing their high acumen when it comes to sports knowledge, philosophy, things of that nature?
Vastly important. Vastly important. I'm of the believer that I know football just as good as everybody else in the press box. And that is something that I think has come to fruition. And you're seeing that more women are being hired as athletic directors at the Division I level and at other levels across the country. And it's exciting to me to see that trend and that trend skyrocketing and going upwards. It's important because it shows the younger generation that you can do it, that it's not off limits. Sports is for everyone. One thing I learned in a sociology class way back when was that sports is a microcosm of society. So whatever we see in sport is what is actually happening in the world around us, and it can relate to anything. It can relate to gender, it can relate to race, it can relate to classism, to education, and you see it reflected in that way. But sports is one of the only things that brings all of those groups together for a centralized purpose. So having women in roles where you are being looked up to as a leader and you're leading a team and you are the expert is important, because the reality is that it doesn't matter. Like, my gender does not define how well I can do a job. It doesn't define how well I know football. I've worked for a football team. I watched Lamar Jackson play. I knew exactly what they were going to run on 3rd down and 10. And all my fellow male colleagues knew it too. So having it modeled for the generation that's going to come after us is the part where it makes it important. And having that voice too, to advocate for then women's sports and our women's teams. I think the one that probably comes to mind the most is women's basketball, right? Like, women's basketball players are just as outstanding as men's basketball players. And the game is probably played a touch differently, but it's still basketball. They're playing basketball. It's the same sport. Diana Taurasi is just as good and has just as impressive of a resume as Kobe Bryant did. And we saw him draw that lineage for his daughters and beginning to do that with the WNBA. So that's where it's important, is modeling it across all things, to be able to promote all types of athletes, and model it for our kids and then our kids' kids down the line, that, you know what, if my granddaughter wants to be an AD one day, go ahead. Like, go do it. There's nothing that's going to be stopping you.
Finally, given the part of the country that Stevens is in, with there being so many Chicago Cubs fans here, you have the privilege of being close to Chris Bryant, who is a San Diego alum, or at least played baseball down there. Have you had a chance to see him during the offseason and give Cubs a little bit of a scouting report on how he's looking heading into this upcoming 60-game season?
I haven't yet. Rumor is he'll probably be around Fowler Park at some point, but no, Chris is a great guy. I was fortunate to meet him at a Padres game, led our head baseball coach, Rich Hill, down to BP to go hang out with him, and got to meet him. And he's great. Him being a great ambassador for the university. Was in town for the baseball alumni game and was inducted to the USD Hall of Fame this year. So he's a very, very great ambassador for our program, and by far one of like the coolest alumni to ever come across, for sure.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Speaking with Stars. I hope you and your family continue to stay safe. I meant to ask that. How has everyone been out there? Have you been able to stay safe during the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, everything's been good. We're in a part of the country that is a lot harder hit than the Midwest in that regard. So the first few months we did not leave our house like at all, but everyone's doing well and everyone's healthy. So it's been good.
Well, thank you. That's good to hear. And anyway, continue to stay safe. And I hope everything goes great for you, and wish you nothing but the best as you move forward in your career.
Thanks for having me.